Hi there. If you are the owner or a leader of a company turning over between 1 million and 20 million in revenue, and you've ever experienced it where growth seems to be happening, revenue is going up, but one way or another, it feels like cash is still tight. It feels like the margin hasn't kept pace with the revenue number. Or if it's the case where sales seems to be pumping, but finance seems to be very misaligned. In this conversation with Adam Cooper, the owner of the fractional CFO firm ACC Finance, we dive into those problems, all of the intersections between sales and finance. So within that, we're looking at things like how do we design a scalable compensation structure? How is it that we can build a forecast which is actually manageable for sales, but is also useful for running of the company? When it comes to sales leaders and finance leaders, what are appropriate joint KPIs to ensure that they're dovetailing rather than wrestling with each other? All of those things are what we cover off in this deep dive conversation. Enjoy. Adam, welcome to Sales Traction.
Ollie, thanks very much for having me. Great to be here.
So when I typically think of finance, I kind of think of it as the opposite function of sales. In as much as if you think of the department of finance and the people in the department of sales, they usually feel like they're polar opposites, but the reality is that they're very, very, very much intertwined. And obviously, when I was on your podcast, this was one of the things we spoke about an awful lot. So I'm really keen to unpick where that entanglement is. And when we're looking at businesses turning over between 1 and 20 million, I know very well where sales tends to break. What I don't know quite so well is where finance tends to break. So the first question that I want to ask you is when companies are scaling, let's say once they're crossing that first £1 million threshold, what is it that tends to change? What is it that starts to rumble and crack?
We typically see that as the business gets above the 1 million mark, as you say, you tend to have more people, you tend to have more clients, there's more moving parts. And so up until that point, a founder can know their numbers intuitively. They say that they know their numbers, but in reality, what they know is their bank balance. And that is something that we tend to try to help them solve. It's an evolution of knowing your bank balance and knowing what's happened in the past to then what's going to happen in the future and helping the leader decide, helping the founder decide what happens next. If you've got more people and you've got more clients, there's more capital decisions to make, more moving parts, and potentially more opportunities to lose money.
So in practice, so I understand that conceptually. In practice, what's the issue with me knowing my bank balance versus what did happen, what's going to happen? Like, what am I actually experiencing as a problem as a result of it?
Sure. So obviously, if you're trying to make a decision about where to invest in 3 months' time, in 6 months' time, you need to understand exactly what's coming in and what's going out of your business. Now, if you're only looking at the bank balance, you're looking at what has happened in the past, but you don't know, for example, if you've hired another 2 people and you're going to be paying out 2 extra salaries, 2 extra sets of national insurance, 2 extra pension contributions, what does that mean in 3 months' time? How much money will you have in the bank in 3 months' time? And that's the difference. So as you get a higher amount of costs, higher expenditure, higher levels of income, you need to plan better to understand whether you're getting ahead of your skis.
So if you were to be working with someone, obviously within a fractional CFO capacity, is that like one of the first things that you would tend to jump into? Like what are the different payment cycles in the different areas? Like what tends to be the levers, if you like, that you can look at and go, all right, I know that I'm going to make an impact here, here, and here. Let me find those things.
Yeah, no, exactly right. We'll look at the shape of their business. So we typically do a health check, a financial health check when we start working with a business, and we'll look at their cash flows. We'll look at their contracts. So we'll understand exactly where they're contracting with clients. So again, if you're growing quickly, that will change. But during that health check, we'll be able to give you a very good idea of what that looks like over the next 3 to 6 months. And then, yes, we'll do a cash flow forecast. And typically we'll look at a 13-week period. So you've got a short-term view, short to medium-term view, I would say, of what's coming in and what's going out each week. And so that gives you the next quarter. You're able to plan around that. And then that gives you enough enough runway to understand and plan for the longer term.
What would you say is the biggest thing? Like when you're working with them, like you put that into place. I remember, just to share experience, one of the very, very, very early clients that I was working with, I built them a sales dashboard, just took all their data, whipped it together in Excel, and it was like they were seeing fire for the first time. Like, wow, I have never seen my business like this before. And it was pretty basic stuff, conversion rates, average deal sizes, etc. But what tends to be that thing for you, which when you put it in front of the client, it's like, wow.
We have a similar situation with that cash flow forecast. So if we're doing a 13-week cash flow forecast, they will typically not have seen something like that before because, if you're working in Xero or you're working in Excel, you won't have all of the inputs and outputs available to hand to do a similar type of forecast. So that can be very eye-opening. The other thing that we typically find is the most eye-opening thing of working with a client for the first few months is when we start to dive into client profitability. So that's understanding which clients are actually generating a profit versus which ones you think are generating a profit. And so that can be very eye-opening as well and can really give the founder indicative direction of where to course correct, which clients to go back to have a conversation with, and to try to, in your monthly business review, your quarterly business review, negotiate a bit harder to extend things or to secure additional funding for extra work or overburn.
If you've got a steady, normal business and it's just ticking over, there's less of a requirement to plan because it's just more of the same. So when looking at those organizations, something that I see, and in fact, I've seen a really bad example of this before, which would be investing ahead of the curve. I'm at 3 million. I want to get to 10 million. And so therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of the profit back into the business. I'm going to redline it. And that's going to be my path to growth. You see the Disney-fied stories, which are like, wow, this is how we did it. But then also frequently you see it just fell out of bed and you end up in a really bad financial position. So if I'm a founder and I'm looking to scale and I'm looking to use my own capital to do it, what's your approach to thinking that through?
So we'll always start with the forecast, whether that's a cash flow forecast, a P&L forecast, an annual plan. I think that's always the place to start because it gets the founder thinking about what's coming up in terms of activities, what's the cash flow or impact of those activities, and how much do I need at the end of that time period, whether it be a plan for a year, a plan for 3 years or 5 years, what do I need as an individual? What's my personal requirements in terms of cash? Okay, let's work back from that, and then let's work through the different activities that you've got planned and see what's viable and what's not viable. So if you go with that 1 year, 3 year, 5 year planning mentality, and you go back from that, what do I need? And then what are the steps to get there? Pretty quickly, you can see whether your plan is viable or not. And that's always the starting point. And then you can have a conversation as a founder with your eyes open. You've got full visibility and right, this makes sense. I'm willing to take this risk, or I know that I need $3,000 a month to live, to pay my bills. So this will give me that, or no, it won't. How am I going to make up that gap? Am I going to get additional funding and investment, or am I going to scale back? And so that plan is the starting point.
Yeah, I got it. And would you say there's like a governance threshold of any kind? Like, look, if you go below X, then wouldn't be advised.
Every business is different and every founder's risk appetite is different. We work to a rule of thumb of 3 months cash in the business. So you'll never get below 3 months operating cash in your bank account. If you do get below that, that's when the red flag flies. So what's your mitigating strategy? Yeah, that might be an overdraft, that might be external investment, that might be a loan, whatever it might be. But that's the rule of thumb that we work to. But again, every client is different, every company is different. And I have some clients who were like, no, I don't want to work to 3 months. I'm comfortable with one. And this is my mitigating strategy. So you need to be flexible as a CFO to work with your clients, but our recommendation would always be 3 months.
Yeah, interesting. Where does that line start and stop? In as much as if I'm a CFO, I'm just thinking about it as if I was in that position, my obligation is to ensure, number one, that I'm doing my job for the founder, of course, but then also number two, to make sure that I'm also taking care of the books and to make sure that we're in a good, stable position. So let's say it is 3 months. That is the runway. And then we've got a founder, CEO, whoever it might be, that is looking to be a little bit reckless. And within EOS world, you refer to this perhaps more as the visionary type, which is like, it'll all pay for itself. It'll all work its way out. How do you balance that in your seat?
Yeah, no, it's the perennial question, and we work with founders in creative businesses who don't think in the same prudent mindset as we do as CFOs, and frankly, that's why they bring us in, because we are the business people who are going to just slow them down or open up the books and show them the reason why that we suggest that they slow down. But to your point, at the end of the day, it's their business. They're the directors, they're the shareholders, they're the owners. They might be the sole shareholder if they're the founder owner, and they don't have other investors, and therefore they're comfortable with taking that greater level of risk. And what I tell the CFOs that we work with is, our job is to provide guidance, to provide instruction and clarity, but at the end of the day, it's their decision to make.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. When I was on your podcast, obviously we're talking quite a lot about the intersection between sales and finance. In order to make your job easier as the CFO, what does great look like from sales?
That's a great question. And obviously the businesses that we work with have a different structure around sales depending on their size. So we work with at the smaller end, the 1 million end, as you're talking about, sales might be the founder and everything might be going through that individual. And it can be quite relaxed in terms of the level of data, the level of insight, the level and quality of that. Whereas towards the high end, the top end, you'll have a lot more structure around that. So you do need to be flexible. That said, there'll always be some non-negotiables that we'll put in place with the business, whatever they are. One is making sure that we've got visibility to the contract as early as possible, making sure that we have visibility even before the contracting stage to the pipeline, and that we've got a clean and clear pipeline that's being updated, has weightings that are reliable and consistent, and that we as the CFO are involved in those conversations so we can ensure that we don't have any over bullishness, let's put it that way, around weightings and pipelines. So if something has slipped, we'll be aware of it as it's happening, or as close to as possible, and then we'll be able to guide and provide advice to the founder, to the board, to the sales team around what our recommendation would be. Then, as I say, it's contracting and making sure that we're close to that. We have visibility of those contracts. They're attached to Xero. They're attached to your server, and we have visibility of that and can check that the payment terms haven't differed from the templates. And then it's about the usual billing cycle and ensuring that we're invoicing frequently and we're doing the revenue recognition frequently. And I guess overarching all of that, final point is training. So I used to be a teacher and educator. I'm very passionate about making sure that the sales teams and the business owners that we work with understand the rationale about what's the difference between billing and revenue recognition. And I won't go into the intricacies of that. I wouldn't want to bore your audience, but the point is that we have a mindset where everyone is aware as much as possible of the rationale and the logic about what finance need from the sales organization.
So I suppose in order for that to be compelling to the salesperson, there needs to be a what's in it for them. There needs to be something for them on the other side. What would you say that typically is?
So we've done a number of sales commissions plans, bonus plans, where it's linked not just to sales, but it's linked to profitability, for example. So we're making sure that the salesperson is interested in the full cycle of what they're bringing in. So there's the key performance indicators that we'll put in place around, the number of deals that we've got in the pipeline, the number of deals that are closed, around the mix and shape of those deals, around collections, and the credit control element of things. So I think it's what you measure gets managed, and it's making sure that we put in place the right key performance indicators and the right financial incentives to ensure that the sales person, people, group are working together with their finance team.
Yeah, got it. What would you? So I'm curious to get a before and after. Let's say there wasn't to be a CFO involved, when it came to all of those things, setting the targets, the budgets, everything that impacts the salespeople, what would you typically tend to see without that input?
It really depends. It's a great question. It depends on the founder, the owner, the people managing the sales cycle and managing the sales team. If they are salespeople themselves, but from a pure biz dev mindset, it can be chaos. If they're from due respect to everyone listening, if they're from a sales operations perspective and have an understanding of the operations behind it, it can be quite well structured. If you've got someone who's started an organization and is leading a 1 to 20 million organization who has previously been in a large corporate, then again it can be quite well structured. If you've got someone from a more creative background who's never been in a large corporate, it can be a bit all over the place. So it does vary. What we like to do is come in, we'll look at how it is at the moment, and then we'll give them a vision of best practice, and then we'll work with them to get as close as possible to that. But it's a pendulum, right? And you can't go all the way one way or all the way the other. You need to work with the founder, the business, the organization as you find it, and gradually get them towards best practice rather than forcing it through, because that doesn't always work.
No, I can certainly relate to that. So talk to me about that then. Obviously, I work in the space of coaching and consulting, and quite often I can go into an organization and I can very quickly see, okay, the org structure is wrong, this setup isn't right, the sales process is far too light for what's actually required here, but I can't just go in and go change this, do this, move that, and then everyone actually does it. And I imagine within the finance side, it's also very similar, especially if you're talking about, well, anything that creates friction in a deal. Let's tighten the deal terms. Let's change when we're expecting to get paid. Can't go below this threshold when it comes to margin. Like, all of those things are good governance, but just because it's good logically doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy ride on the other side. So what would be your tips or recommendations when it comes to actually rolling out some of those best practices with the teams that would otherwise be a little bit resistant?
Yeah, no, it's you're speaking my language. We obviously work with the same types of clients because we see this obviously a lot. I think it's very much about carrot and stick. You can't go in and just be stick and just force things through and put through a bunch of policies and expect them to be followed. It doesn't work that way. So it's identifying, again, going back to our health check, we identify where the low hanging fruit is, and from a financial perspective, that will be right. What has the largest cash impact now? What has the largest strategic finance impact, medium and longer term? We'll prioritize those, and then we'll work with the founder, and we'll work with the exec board, we'll work with the individual teams to go, right, these are the key priorities. How do we best get these implemented in your organization with your help and your buy-in? And I think very much you probably find the same, is that's first 30, 60 days is critical, because that's building the relationships. We'll go into the client, we'll discuss with them collaboratively about how we're going to make this happen, and then we put in place, it's just good project management. It's putting in place targets, it's putting in place a roadmap, it's putting in place weekly catch-ups, monthly business reviews, looking at the numbers, seeing things start to happen, and that way you get far more done than if you go in and try and shoehorn a whole bunch of stuff in. And you've probably done it. I did it at the beginning of my career, where you're less aware of these softer skills, and that's actually not fair to call them softer skills, because they're so important. Like, stuff doesn't get done unless you're able to work with people, talk to people. And I think increasingly with the technology that we've got, and with AI and everything else, people think, I can just put something into ChatGPT, pull off a policy, send it out, and it's going to get done. No, you need to work with people, do business with people. People can choose to follow something or not. So I think it's all of that, but it's making sure that you build those relationships and then work with the organization as you find it, not as you wish it were like.
Yeah, it almost sounds like a co-created plan. Like, you kind of know the direction where you want it to go to, but if it doesn't have their thumbprint on it, then it's not going to quite go so far. Even if it's exactly where you wanted it to get to, but just taking them on that journey.
100%. And we're doing we do lots of system implementation. So we'll take a company that has no accounting system, or they're using spreadsheets, or they're using a really old-fashioned system, and we'll introduce a newer, more modern system that does everything that we need them to do. And it's like, if you're trying to do that yourself without the buy-in of the accountant or the bookkeeper or the team there, it's never going to work. They're not going to use it. It will be designed badly. It will be implemented badly, and then you'll get garbage in, garbage out. So when you go on a project like that, it's about getting their buy-in at the outset, working out a plan of action together collaboratively, to your point, and then implementing it together, making sure that there's sufficient support for that implementation, so that the person whose day job it is to do the sales or to do the bookkeeping or the accounting, they're not doing two jobs. And that you're supporting them in that and taking them on that journey so they see the light at the end of the tunnel. So I think it's so critical that you give them the tools, you work on a plan together, and then you're regularly checking in and realistically feeding back on progress.
Yeah, I love it. What would you say is the ideal frequency of collaboration between CFO and sales director? I think there's a lot of, just when I think back, I can think of so many scenarios where sales director kind of wants to run off in one direction, we're building the future, CFO obviously different, but I have seen it before where it's like perfect harmony. And in fact, one of the first companies I ever worked at, this was very much it. And it was genuinely like rocket fuel. It was sales growth with high margin. But I think by default, that there's not inherent collaboration. So I'm curious to know, at that top to top level, what does great look like? Like, what have you experienced? And perhaps what have you also experienced that hasn't been so good?
Yeah, and I think at the beginning of an engagement or a relationship where you're setting things up, the frequency with which you're collaborating is going to naturally be higher than when things are running smoothly. So I think at the outset, it's very much, we'll have weekly catch-ups with the key stakeholders that we work with, and so the sales director would definitely, absolutely be one of those. We'll put in place the framework. We'll put in place the guardrails at that initial, and again, it comes back to 30, 60 days. We'll have weekly meetings, putting in place those policies, those processes, those commission plans, the bonus structures, the pipelines, all of that good stuff. And then after that, it can slightly slow down. So you're then able to do less frequent catch-ups, but you've got the frameworks that everyone's working to. And now, obviously, there's the tools where everyone has visibility of the pipeline, everyone has visibility of the dashboards. So you're able to track those sort of slightly more remotely. But you still want to be regularly touching base, regularly checking in on, this is where it comes down to bi-weekly meetings around, client profitability, around pipeline weighting, around, what we've got in terms of runway. And those conversations have to have the key stakeholders in. And that's where it works best is initial high frequency, high volume, set the guardrails, and then you can dial it back down a little bit. I think to your question about where it doesn't work so well is where you haven't set the relationship up on either side with the right mentality. And I think that comes from senior sponsorship. So that will be from the owner or the CEO or the founder hasn't really engaged with the process. And that's on us, coming in and making sure that they buy in and they understand why we need to have that relationship with the sales director. But if the CEO or the founder or the owner doesn't insist on that relationship working, it can fall at the first. So I think that's critical, and that's where it doesn't always work. But if you get that senior sponsorship, it can fly. And as you say, it can be gold. If the CFO and the sales director are working hand in hand, you can really drive margin improvements in relationships with clients, making sure that procurement on the client side is fully supported. All of that good stuff. That requires a symbiotic hand in glove relationship. So, but it comes down to that sponsorship at the outset. Critical initial high volume of meetings, and then following that framework.
Yeah. Okay. So like intensity followed by consistency.
Yeah.
I love it. So when looking at that consistency piece, in order for it to go beyond just I'm not gonna say a flash in the pan, but beyond a whole lot of excitement, we've done a whole load of new things, but now on the ongoing piece. In order for the individuals to not go separate ways, so if I was to be looking at business development teams and closing teams, for example, oftentimes, or sales and marketing, it can often be marketing is being blamed for bad leads and sales is being blamed for bad conversion. And oftentimes the solution is to have shared KPIs, a shared measure that they're both trying to drive. So let's say from lead to discovery, both are responsible for that. Are there any key metrics that you think would be good for a CFO or a finance director and a sales director to share?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the type of business again. So they have to be aligned with those metrics that the business as a whole are following. I think where I've seen it not work is where you have too many key metrics, which not just diversifying from each other, but in general as an organisation. So I typically like to have 6 to 9 at a company level KPIs, and those should be revenue, gross profit, net profit. So your really basic ones that you sort of want to run your business to. But then when it comes down to CFO and sales director, they need to be aligned with what outcomes are you trying to achieve. So again, it comes down to the health check and what are the challenges that business is facing. So if it comes down to there's not enough deals in the pipeline, having key KPIs that the CFO and the sales director are aligned with around the number of deals that we want to have in the pipeline, tracking the deals per week that we've got in the pipeline, tracking the average order value, tracking the acquisition costs, those kind of next level down metrics that tie into your overarching 6 to 9 KPIs at a company level, and having those shared, as you say, is critical. So I think that's where the consistency will work, and don't be afraid to change KPIs. I know the sort of the considered truth is that you have to pick your KPIs and stick with them. But if it's not working, then review them, refine them, tweak them. And I'm not saying you do that on a monthly basis, but if it's not working at a quarterly stage, you might be doing a reforecast. Have a look at the KPIs at Q1, 2, 3, at your budget stage and planning stage for next year, and tweak them. And particularly in the current climate, where we're seeing lots of pivoting, lots of challenges, the KPIs that you chose last year might not still be relevant this year. So I think that's key as well.
So when planning for a following year, one of the questions that I get a lot is when it comes to compensation design, especially for salespeople. Now, the incentive for the business owner is I want to pay my people really, really well so I can get the best possible talent and I can retain them and I can keep them. Then there's the business reality of we're not making infinite margin here. And there's also other costs, and there's also deal cycle lag, and there's also all of those other things as well. So when you're advising business owners when it comes to compensation design versus how we're planning to grow, what tends to be your recommendations there as like best practices?
So let's take a step back, right? So if you're starting from scratch and you're designing a business compensation package for your first sales leader, your first sales hire, that's going to be very different from if you've got an existing organization that you're adding another sales lead to, another sales hire to. So I think where you're designing it from scratch, it's using market benchmarks. It's making sure that what you're doing is competitive with what your sort of other clients and other companies in your space are doing. You're taking advice. There's no harm in picking up the phone and speaking to other people in the space, whether that be recruiters, whether that be CEOs of other competitors, and making sure that you've got a guide, a steer, using your desktop research as well, and just making sure that you're setting things up in the right way that doesn't create a rod for your back. If you've got an existing organization and you're taking another hire, then it comes down to internal benchmarking. What you don't want to do is create a bells and whistles compensation package for hire number 1, and then numbers 2, 3, and 4, you can't maintain that. So I think it's that internal benchmarking where you're ensuring that you've got a package that works and that can grow with you. That's where it's critical, because I've been involved in trying to redesign these types of packages once things are in play, and that's impossible. So you as a sales leader and a sales hire have signed up to something, you're not going to renegotiate that. It's going to be very difficult, and you can't change that for the subsequent hire because people talk and they'll find out. So I think it's that external benchmarking, what works for your industry, what will get you where you need to get to, and then as you're medium-sized and growing, it's making sure you're doing that internal benchmarking. And then the final thing is, if you do need to change it, don't, and I've seen this so many times where you get someone coming in, it's middle of the year, they come in and go, right, this isn't working for me, can we renegotiate? And you renegotiate in July, and then someone else finds out, and then in September you renegotiate again, and then in November you have a third round. No. Like, draw a line in the sand. If someone's come to you and you've realised that you've messed up, or you've realised you've got to change something, you do it once and done. And that's at the end of the year as part of your budgeting cycle, and you position it in that way. Don't get fooled into thinking that it's a must-have to renegotiate now, otherwise, employee A is going to leave. Yeah. That's a risk. You need to stand firm on that, because otherwise it can get incredibly messy.
Yeah, it's something that I've seen happen a good number of times before, where it almost becomes like the tail wagging the dog. In as much as, especially when it comes to that first hire, I think for the first hire, especially if you've not hired salespeople before, there's almost an inferiority complex. Okay, why would they want to join us? We've got to give them something really good. What's the maximum we can possibly give? And then that person joins, and then reality hits, and maybe they do get some good deals, and maybe they are a great salesperson. But then when the reality hits of, okay, we now need to hire salesperson number 2, but this doesn't work with our cash flow, or we're paying out based on contract signed rather than invoice or cash in bank. Very quickly that can happen. And it's the fine balancing act of thinking far enough forward of, we're designing a compensation structure effectively for a team rather than an individual. And I think most people, when they look at it initially, it's, we need to hire salesperson number 1. What's our compensation design going to be for salesperson number 1? Rather than, if we were to aggregate this out over 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 people, what does that actually look like? And the fastest way to churn a salesperson is to mess with the money. Always.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And I think, sorry, just to add to that, I think you always want to, what we say to founders is, you always want to be managing your business as if you were preparing to sell it. So imagine that you've got, 3 years' time, you're looking to exit. What does that look like? This is why, coming back to the start, we start with 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plans. So you have that end point in mind. If you have that end point in mind, you'll know that in 3 years' time, you're going to have a sales team of 6. And therefore, we need to design the now for that rather than designing the now for the 1. So I think, yeah, that's exactly right.
Love it. And if I'm a founder, obviously there's always nuances and there's always different scenarios. But if I was to drop a stone, it was to land on a 1 to 20 million pound founder, and you were to change one thing in their business that was to typically make a big difference over the course of a week, what would that thing be? What's the lever?
I think that's a great question. I think it's making sure that they have that cash flow forecast in place. So I think it's critical, put in place that cash flow forecast, and that can be on a piece of paper, it can be on a spreadsheet, doesn't have to be anything sophisticated, but we put that in place first with our clients. That would be the one thing, and it's giving them that visibility, not looking backwards, but looking forwards and getting clearer decision making off the back of it.
Amazing. Adam, thank you so much. Before we drop, if you were to just share with everyone how they can find you, perhaps also introduce your podcast, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast is the Fractional CFO Show. We are ACC Finance Solutions, accfinancesolutions.com, and I'm on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to connect, very happy to do that. But thank you very much, Ollie.